Support and welcome to another episode of FooBar. Today we are going to learn about Aurora Serverless and Lambda. If you're watching my YouTube channel, I think this is the first time I will be talking about Aurora. So sorry for that. Aurora has been out since 2014 and I never mentioned it. What is Aurora? Aurora is a database that Amazon created some years ago. As I said, it was born in 2014. And the main difference with other databases out there is that it's built for the cloud. I will not get into the particular details on how it's built, but if you are interested in knowing more, let me know in the comments and I might do a video or dig more into this service. But up to now is one of the fastest adopted services in AWS because it's quite powerful. It's a relational database built for the cloud that is compatible with existing relational database engines from the open source community like MySQL and Postgres. So that means that you can migrate your applications there if they're using these engines, and it should work pretty straightforward, or build new applications using these engines, and it should be okay to use Aurora. Because of the way Aurora is built, it has amazing features like backup and restoring and replication and all kind of things with the storage, like you can increase the storage as the database is used. In other database services, it's quite hard to increase the storage without stopping the database. So it has lots of benefits. Aurora comes in two flavors. The Aurora Basic, that is an RDS service, relational database service, that it's built with a cluster and you provision the amount of services you want, and well, like other RDS services, and the Aurora Serverless that scales as much as you need and it can shut down if there is no traffic. Aurora Serverless had many differences from the normal Aurora. In many of the features were not out there, the scalability was not really great, so I was not that into it about talking about it until re:Invent 2020. In re:Invent 2020, they announced Aurora Serverless version 2. And in this next iteration of Aurora, that is now in preview, you can access it in the link I leave you in the description box. In this version of Aurora, all the issues that Aurora Serverless had are fixed. Now the features are compatible, the scalability is in milliseconds. So now Aurora became very interesting for me. But I have to say, I have been not using relational database in forever. I'm a fan of Dynamo and that's what I use for my applications. But I think relational databases are fine and there's nothing that there is no problem of using them if you're familiar with them. And with options like Aurora Serverless 2, this is something that now it becomes a real game changer for your applications. So that's all I will be talking about Aurora in this video. I don't want to make a long video about Aurora. There is quite a lot of things that I can say, but I don't want to get into the details. If you want a deep dive in Aurora, let me know. I will do it, or I will find someone to do it for me, depending on the interest. So I want this video to be a very practical video because I like to do tutorials, I like to show you how to do things, and I want to show you how simple it is to set up an Aurora Serverless. In this case will be version 1, but I imagine version 2 should work fine as soon as you get access to the preview, using CDK and using a Lambda function. So we will have a simple Lambda function that is triggered by an API gateway, and that Lambda function will be writing and reading from the database. You can re-architect this in many ways. You can have multiple Lambda functions, one for each endpoint, blah, 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 blah. I will do it very simple, one endpoint, one Lambda function, one database, but this is a demo. There is many ways for Lambda to connect to the relational database. And in this case, I will be using the Data API. What is the Data API? The Data API is a way to access the database as a service. So if you're familiar with Dynamo, this sounds obvious, that you just use the API of the database to get, retrieve, update, delete, do operations in the database. That's obvious. But when you're coming from the relational world, you are expecting to connect to the database, then to do your operations, then close the connection, and so on and so forth. In the world of serverless, that is kind of problematic, because when you have multiple Lambda functions, and a lot of them, they will be all handling the connections independently, and that can lead to a lot of problems in your database. Like you run out of open connections, and you're killing the memory, and you are making it perform really bad. For that, AWS have announced the RDS Proxy. That is a proxy that will sit between your database and your Lambda functions, for example, or Fargate containers, and will handle the connections. But this, if it's you're using an old model, that you have these open and closed connections, and you cannot change it, for example, for legacy applications or things like that. But if you're building an application from start and you can use the data API, I think that's a better option. It's cleaner and it will take care of handling everything in the back for you. So you just call the API for performing operations, and that's it. If you're liking this video up to now, let me know by a like. A likes really help me to reach more people, or if you like it more, just leave me a comment. I will really appreciate that. So now let's go to the demo and see it in action. For this demo, you will need an AWS account. You will need configure it in your computer, and you need to have CDK installed and configured in your computer. I leave you the links on how to do everything in the description box, so you can start from the same place that I'm going to start. So if you have CDK installed and you didn't install it like today, like right now, I would recommend you to install it again so it updates. It keeps on updating all the time, so you have the latest version of CDK. That's always handy. And then from there, we will start working on our project. So now that we are done, the next thing we want to do is to install all the dependencies that CDK needs in order to work. So whenever you use CDK, you are using different libraries, and you need to install them in your application. I will be using the EC2, the Lambda, the RDS, the API Gateway version 2, and then the API Gateway integrations. And with all that, I do npm install and the name of all these libraries, and they will be available for me to use when I need to. After this is installed, we open Visual Studio Code and we can start working on our application. So if we go into the bin folder, we can see the CDK Aurora Serverless.ts, and that's kind of where our application starts. If we open there, we will see that there is one stack, that is the CDK Aurora Serverless stack. We could have multiple stacks in here, and each of them will create an independent CloudFormation stack, so that's pretty neat. In this case, we only have one stack. So the code for our particular stack will be inside the lib folder and in the directory, in the file called like CDK Aurora Serverless stack. And this is empty because we need to create our infrastructure. I really like CDK because it's so simple to create applications, and you will see, if you never saw CDK in action, you will see how powerful this is. So now I import all the libraries that we just added to our packages in the npm install, and then I will start writing my code. The first thing I need is to have a VPC. VPCs are needed because Aurora will run inside a VPC, so we need to have a VPC before defining Aurora. If you're using CDK, that takes one line of code. So basically you define the VPC and you put a name. Please put a name, so then you can find it. And that's it. The next thing we want to do is to create the Aurora cluster. And this is a little bit longer, but still very short and very clear. And the cluster will be a serverless Aurora cluster. And we need to put a name. And then we will say what kind of engine we are using, and we are going to say that is Postgres. Then we will say which version of the Postgres is, in this case the 10. And then we need to put a name to our database. I will call it testDB, very original as always. We associate it with the VPC that is going to run into, and then we decide if it will pause every X seconds and all the scalability. And that's kind of it. Then we will create our Lambda function, the one that will be triggered by API gateway and invoking and accessing this database. And this Lambda function is called my function. It will be node 12. And the code for this Lambda function will be in the Lambda function folder that we are going to create in a second. The handler is the index file, and the method is the handler. And then we will give 1024 megabytes of memory to this function, and we will pass some environmental variables to the function. And these environmental variables are very important to be able for the function to use the data API and access the database. We need to pass the cluster ARN that we are getting from the cluster. We need to pass the secret ARN, that is the cluster secret. And this is super interesting because when we create an Aurora Serverless this way, it's using the secret manager to manage the credentials for the Aurora Serverless. So if you see here, there is no visibility on the credentials. So basically, the cluster that we create will have a secret manager element associated with it, with the credentials for the database. So then we can link that secret manager ARN from the database to our data API, and in that way the data API can access the Aurora database without really having to know the credentials. And I think that's super important because we don't want to put credentials anywhere in our code. We want to be credential free as much as possible. So in this way, it's super easy. Then we need to have the name from the database. We will need it as an environmental variable, and that's kind of basically it. And now I will create the folder, the Lambda functions, but we'll come a little bit later to this folder to build the Lambda functions itself. But there is the folder, and there will be all the code for our application. Let's continue with our infrastructure, and there we need to grant access to the Lambda function to access the cluster. So that's important. All the Lambda functions are born without privileges, and that's one line of code that grants data API access. So this is very fine-grained access to the database. So this is super cool. We don't need to define any IAM policies or roles or anything. By using CDK with one line of code, we just define the exact fine-grained access that we need from this Lambda to this cluster. The next thing we are going to create is an API Gateway version 2 endpoint. In this case, we are having one endpoint with the method basically any. So all the methods will be accepted, and that will be integrated with a Lambda proxy integration to our function. So that's very straightforward. I like CDK so much because everything makes so much sense, at least maybe because I have the mind of a developer. The last thing we are going to do is to write the output, and we want to have in our CloudFormation output the API URL, so then we can use it in Postman. So I love CDK. This is so simple. There are 50 lines of code here that define Aurora Serverless cluster. Well, it defines a VPC, a Serverless Aurora cluster, with all these shabangs. It defines a Lambda function, and it defines an API gateway, and it connects all through with the right permissions. This is so powerful with only 50 lines of code, and it's very readable. I love CDK. So now I will go into my Lambda functions, and I will write npm init. And I will basically initialize this package with a package JSON because we'll need to install some dependencies. And then I will create the file index.ts where our handler function will be. I will do some imports that we are going to create later. And then we will write some method there, the handler method. And basically this handler method is a big switch that will tell which code to execute in each time. So very simple. And then after it's doing whatever it needs to do, it sends a response, and I have a method called sendRes that formats the response in the right way and return it. There is no magic here. Then I will create the file getToDo. The getToDo, again, is just getting things from the database. I will get here a particular one based on an ID. So if you see there, I'm using the data API by building a query. And then I use db.query and I pass that query with the parameter. And you can see there that I have an import that is the db. So we are going to look at that in a second. And then that call to the db database query will return something, and I can just show it. So basic SQL, we pass it to database query and it works. So here is the database query, and this is basically using the data API client. So I need to pass some parameters to the database client, and that's where I needed the environmental variables. I need the secret ARN, I need the resource ARN for the cluster, and I need the name of the database. So that's why I'm passing all these things. And then I just export it and we can use it anywhere in our code. So this is the definition of that, and we will need to add to our project the data API client. Then I will create the create to do. Again, it's using the data API to create something, to insert. Yeah. And we here require the UUID. So we are going to do npm install the data API client and also the UUID in our Lambda function, so we can use them when we use the function, when we deploy the function. The next thing we want to add is the list to dos. Again, just select all from this data, from this table, and then we will add the type. Because we're using TypeScript, I like to have this to-do type. And this is basically the same type as the database when we create, as the table. So when we create the table, we will have the same structure and the same everything. So that's it. If you're using CDK for the first time, or you're using it for the first time in a region, you will need to do CDK bootstrap. And in this case, I will do it in my Virginia region, in the profile Virginia that is called because it's pointing to my region Virginia. And that will basically set up CDK to work. That you need to do the first time. If you have any errors when deploying, this might be missing, so don't forget to do that. So that takes a moment, and then we can run the deployment. So when this finishes, now we have the environment bootstrapped, and we can deploy. We will do npm run build to build the project and to build all the TypeScript and have everything ready, and then CDK deploy. And if you have a profile like I do, just type the profile name. Then it will show you what it will create, and that's pretty neat before deploying it. And you say yes, and this will take for a while. So I will basically speed up until this is completed. So when this is completed, we will get in our output the HTTP API from the API gateway that we will be using in a second. But first, we need to create our table. We haven't created a table yet, so our database is kind of tableless. So if we try to execute anything in our application, we will get an error. So we will need to go to our AWS account into, we can type Aurora or RDS and get inside RDS. And there we will go into the instances, and you will see that you have an instance. So you will see that you don't have any instance, but you have one cluster. I just click the instances, but feel free to click whatever. There is our serverless Aurora. And then we want to connect to it. So for that, you can open in a different tab the secret manager. So we will do that. And there you will see that you have one secret, and that's the one that we will need to connect to the database. So we get the secret ARN, and then we will paste it to connect to Aurora. So we do query, actions query, and there we will be prompted with some form that we need to complete. The first thing is the username, and we will use the connect with a secret manager ARN. So there we need to paste the ARN. And the next thing we need to do is to put the name of the database. So you can take it from the code if you don't remember, but it's this test database. And then when it's that, we will connect to the database and we will be accessing it. So now you can type the basic create statement from SQL, create table, and put an ID and a task. And those are the same exact names that are in our to-do TypeScript file, in our type. So ID and tasks. So do that, and then basically you can save that query if you want or not, and basically that will create a table. So that's pretty nice. If you want, you can describe and see if you have the tables and what is inside each of the tables. Let's go to Postman now, and basically in there what I did is I created a new request that has the type post, and it has the URL that we got from the output from the deployment. And then I put -prod -hello, that's the full endpoint that you can get from the API gateway. And this is a post, and we need to pass a body, and in this case we need to pass the task. So I put task ABC. So this is our to-do, and basically when I send this request, I will get back the new item, the new to-do, and that's good. That's writing into the database, and then I can write a couple more to see how that works. And all that is going through the Lambda function, through the data API into the database. And then I can do get, and I can remove the body. In this case, I didn't need to remove it because nobody's reading it. And I will get all the items that are in the database. That's pretty neat. That's selecting all from the database, and that's cool. And then I can grab one ID, for example, and do a get with an ID, and that will just bring me the right element. So that's pretty neat, and it's so simple. So that's it, all I wanted to show you in this video. The code is available in GitHub. I hope you enjoy it. I think this is something I've been wanting to do for a while, but now with the new release of Aurora Serverless 2, I think this is a great moment to get started with Aurora and start playing with it. And if you want to use CDK, I think this is a great way to create infrastructure as code applications and build everything very replicatable and like you can do in any environment with all the benefits of infrastructure as code. So yeah, this is something that makes me very happy to talk. Finally, after like 5 years of running the YouTube channel, I'm never talking about Aurora. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and I see you in the next episode of FooBar. Ciao, ciao!